No one mentioned his name anymore. Not during holidays, not in family group chats, not even in whispered conversations behind closed doors. Thayer Quinn didn't die, but to his family, especially since the day he came out, it was easier to pretend he had. Like a photograph carefully cropped to remove the part that didn't fit. Thayer had been trimmed out of every moment, memory, and milestone. It was never announced out loud, just a silent, methodical vanishing. He used to design spaces that made people feel like they belonged. Kitchens where mothers baked birthday cakes. Nurseries where fathers first held their daughters. Living rooms wrapped in warm lighting and soft textures that made people stay. Thayer's entire profession revolved around creating a sense of home, and yet he no longer had one. His childhood house still stood outside Eugene, Oregon. White porch, dusty, rose-trim hydrangeas planted by his late grandmother. But the last time he pulled into that driveway, his father hadn't come outside. His mother had opened the door just enough to say, "This isn't a good time," and closed it again. He stood on the porch holding a basket of Meyer lemons from his apartment garden. That was 5 years ago. No one had called since. His sister Lily once adored him. When they were young, she used to sneak into his room during thunderstorms. She clung to him during her first breakup, confessed her dreams of motherhood, asked him to help design a baby room long before she'd met Ethan. He still had the notebook where she scribbled baby names and nursery colors, pages worn from flipping as if they were holding on to a hope neither of them fully understood yet. He never stopped flipping through that book. Not even after she blocked him the day he posted a photo of himself and his boyfriend on their anniversary. She never responded. Not even when he sent her a birthday card every year. He kept sending them anyway. When he learned through a mutual friend that Lily was pregnant, after multiple rounds of IVF, his heart stung in a way he couldn't name. He hadn't been told, wasn't invited to the announcement dinner, didn't see the ultrasound, but he smiled, sent flowers, and made a quiet donation to the fertility center in her city anonymously. No one ever knew. The baby shower happened on a bright Sunday afternoon. He found out through Facebook. A distant cousin had posted pictures. Pastel decorations, mason jar lemonade, a crowd of smiling faces under a vine-covered pergola. Thayer looked for himself in the photos even though he knew he wouldn't be there. There was a wide group shot, cousins, aunts, uncles, Lily beaming in the center. Off to the side was a single empty chair. It wasn't meant for him, but for a moment it felt like it had been. He closed the app, and the ache that came afterward wasn't rage or jealousy. It was something deeper. Something like a quiet resignation. Like accepting that your own family had built a life where your absence felt more convenient than your presence. And yet, even in that space of erasure, Thayer kept remembering what he once told Lily when they were younger. Real love isn't loud. Sometimes it's just what stays after the silence. She had forgotten that. He hadn't. If you've ever been erased by the people you loved most, but chose love anyway, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more true stories that live in the quiet corners of the human heart. The package was waiting at his doorstep on a rainy Thursday morning. No note from the sender, just a large, sturdy box addressed to Mr. Thayer Quinn with a return label from a specialty bakery in Denver. He hadn't ordered anything. There were no birthdays coming up, no anniversaries, and certainly no reason for a cake to appear at his door. He stood there for a while, hesitant. Then, with practiced caution, the kind you develop after being blindsided too many times, he opened the box. Inside was a full-color mock-up of a custom cake design. It was delicate pale ivory with intricate sugar leaves forming a nest around a pair of sleeping fondant birds. In elegant piping across the top, it read, "Welcome, little one." Beneath the image was a detailed invoice. The cake had cost over $2,000. The customer name TQ. The note attached was handwritten and warm. "Thank you for trusting us to make this a part of your celebration. Your design touched our whole team. It was an honor." Thayer sat down, hard, not because the design startled him, but because it was familiar. Years ago, Lily had once doodled a rough sketch of this exact idea in his notebook. It was a quiet evening after she'd been crying about her uncertain fertility future. He'd stayed up with her, sipping tea on the back porch, listening to her dreams about someday becoming a mother. "I want the baby to feel like it was always wanted," she had whispered, "like it was already loved." He had sketched out a cake based on her words, Soft whites, warm shapes, a little nest, and she had called it the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. He never showed it to anyone else. Now someone had brought it to life, but not for him. He stared at the invoice again. The initials, the amount, the return address. It didn't add up. He hadn't paid for this. He hadn't spoken to Lily in years. But someone had recreated that memory, replicated it down to the smallest detail, and sent it, not to her but to him. His first instinct was to assume a mistake, a clerical error. Maybe someone had confused the shipping addresses, maybe a different TQ had placed the order. But deep down, something didn't feel accidental. This felt precise, like someone had reached into a closed-off part of his life and tugged gently on a string he thought had long snapped. He looked closer. The note, though generic, was signed with a name he recognized, the same baker whose creations Lily had raved about years ago. She had once mentioned wanting that specific bakery for her baby shower. And if that was the case, someone had gone through with it. Someone had chosen the exact design from his old notebook. And then, someone had ensured that design would find its way back to him. He wasn't invited to the baby shower, but the cake, or at least the ghost of it, had arrived on his doorstep like a forgotten message finally delivered. He spent the rest of the day sitting by the window, the box on the table beside him, wondering who had remembered, who had decided he deserved to know, and who had chosen to stay silent. What he didn't know, not yet, was that it had been Ethan. In the weeks leading up to the baby shower, Lily's final round of IVF had nearly been canceled. Insurance had stopped covering it, savings had run dry, and the clinic had given them an ultimatum: full payment or no treatment. In quiet desperation, Ethan had reached out to an old folder of emails trying to find options: grants, charities, even loans. And in that same folder, he found something else. A message from Thayer sent years ago offering to help. No strings attached, only if you're ever truly out of options. Ethan hadn't replied back then, but now cornered, he'd clicked forward, sent it to the clinic, and added one line: use this fund. I know he meant it. Thayer's donation had never been withdrawn. It had sat there untouched, waiting to matter. Ethan had paid for the cake himself using the same initials out of respect, or maybe guilt. And when the bakery, relying on past records, sent the confirmation to Thayer instead, Ethan didn't stop them. He thought maybe, just maybe, Thayer deserved to be included in some way, even if no one else would allow it. The email came 2 days later. Simple subject line: coffee, no signature. Just a sender: Ethan Graham. Thayer stared at it for a long time before opening. The body of the message was short: a time, a place, and one sentence: I think we need to talk. They met at a corner cafe just outside downtown. Neutral ground, safe distance from anyone who might recognize either of them. Ethan was already seated, hands around a mug he hadn't touched. He looked nervous, not guilty, just tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying too many secrets and never having a place to set them down. Thayer sat across from him without a word. There was no anger in his face, just curiosity threaded tightly with hurt. Ethan didn't start with apologies. He began with the truth. He told Thayer everything: about the fertility clinic, about the panic, about the last-minute scramble to cover costs, and about the email, the one Thayer had sent years ago when Lily first mentioned IVF. I never told her, Ethan said. I didn't know if I should, but when things fell apart, I remembered you offered, and you said no credit, just love. Thayer looked away. He had forgotten the wording. But now that he heard it again, he remembered exactly where he was when he wrote it. Alone in his studio apartment, watching a snowstorm outside, thinking about the sister who no longer spoke to him, but whose dreams he still wished would come true. Ethan went on. He told Thayer that he'd taken the liberty to use the funds, not because he expected forgiveness, but because he believed the child deserved to be born into love. And somewhere deep down, he knew that love began with Thayer's gesture. He confessed to ordering the cake in secret, using Thayer's design, and intentionally signing it TQ. Not to claim credit, but as a quiet acknowledgement. You were never supposed to see the invoice, he admitted. But maybe I'm glad you did. Thayer sat in silence, not out of anger, but out of the kind of stillness that follows years of being silenced. There was nothing performative in Ethan's confession. No performance of redemption, just a man trying to do one small right thing after so many wrong silences. Ethan reached into his coat, and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He slid it across the table. "I had them make an extra," he said. "I don't know if it's anything, but I thought you should have it." Inside was a smaller version of the cake topper from the baby shower. 2 sleeping sugar birds nestled in a white nest, perfectly formed, delicate, untouched. Thayer didn't cry. Not there, but something cracked inside him. Not painfully, more like a door that had been stuck for years finally shifting, just a little, enough to let air through. They didn't make promises. There were no grand declarations. Ethan only said, "The baby will be told the truth. She'll know you were a part of how she got here, even if no one else in the family is ready to admit it." That night, Thayer placed the sugar birds on the windowsill of his studio. He didn't eat them. He didn't move them. Just watched them slowly soften under the changing light. A reminder of something that could have been sweet if only it had been allowed to stay. In the days that followed, Thayer went back to work, met with clients, sent drafts for new projects. But he moved a little differently, less guarded, still alone but no longer invisible. And then an invitation arrived, not from Lily, not from their parents, from Ethan. A gender reveal party, backyard gathering, nothing formal, just family and a few friends. "No obligations," the card read, "but I hope you'll come, because she's going to have an uncle, and it should be you." Thayer stared at the card for hours. He knew what it meant to walk back into a space that once pushed him out. He knew the looks, the whispers, the heavy silence that hung in rooms where acceptance was conditional. But he also knew something else now. Someone had seen him, not just tolerated him, seen him, and maybe for the first time, that was enough to open the door. He took the card, tucked it into the notebook where Lily once scribbled names in nursery colors. He didn't decide that day whether he'd go, but for the first time in years, he wanted to. The party was held on a late Sunday afternoon, not at a banquet hall or event space, but in Ethan and Lily's backyard, the same one where Thayer had helped build the pergola years ago before everything fell apart. The ivy had overgrown since then. The wood had weathered under Oregon rain, but the space still looked like his hands had once mattered here. He arrived early, parking a block away and walking the rest of the way on foot. It wasn't about shame. It was about control, giving himself the space to leave quietly if it all went wrong. He wore a simple navy sweater, the one he always chose when he wanted to feel invisible but intact. As he neared the gate, he could already hear the laughter, the clink of glasses, the sharp pop of a balloon somewhere. No one greeted him. No one screamed or threw their arms around his neck. He stepped into the yard and moved quietly along the edge, hovering near the garden beds. Conversations flowed around him, but no one pulled him in. He recognized faces, cousins, church friends, distant relatives who glanced in his direction and quickly looked away. Some didn't recognize him at all. Time had changed him, sharpened his jaw, softened his eyes, changed the way he stood when he entered a room. And some people didn't expect the dead to walk into the light again. He didn't look for Lily. He didn't expect her to look for him. He watched from a distance as Ethan made his way toward the picnic table near the patio. There, covered in a linen cloth, was the cake. The same shape, the same creamy color, the same quiet elegance. And suddenly, all the small talk around the yard started to fade. People were gathering. It was time. Ethan stepped forward, holding a small envelope. He tapped the side of a glass, but the crowd didn't quiet immediately. Only when he spoke the words, "Before we reveal the gender, I need to say something," did people begin to listen. "I want to thank someone today," he continued. "Someone who didn't ask to be thanked, who wasn't even invited to the first celebration, who has spent years loving this family from the outside. Someone who chose love over pride, silence over blame, and presence, even when we offered none in return." The silence grew deeper, shifting feet, subtle frowns. Someone whispered, "What is he doing?" But Ethan kept going. "This baby is here because of many prayers, many miracles, and one act of quiet generosity we almost erased. But we won't erase it today, because when our backs were against the wall and hope was slipping, someone stepped in. Not for credit, not for recognition, but simply because he loved his sister." He stepped aside and someone lifted the lid off the cake box. Gasps filled the yard, not because of the pink or blue inside, but because of what was written across the top in soft looping script. "Thank you, Uncle Thayer." The message landed like a stone in still water. Conversations stopped. Faces twisted with confusion, discomfort, realization. A few guests turned to look at Thayer, who still stood off to the side near the garden, too far to read the words, but close enough to feel them. He didn't move. Lily was the first to speak. Not with a microphone, not with a speech. She walked across the yard, dress grazing her ankles, hands cradling her belly, eyes locked on her brother. She stopped in front of him. "I read your card," she said. Her voice was low, steady. "The one you sent 3 years ago. I didn't answer. I told myself I was too busy, that it would be easier if I just let it go. But the truth is, I was afraid that being near you would cost me love, respect, safety. So I chose what was easy, and I let them all forget you." Her eyes welled, but she didn't blink. "You never stopped choosing me even when I stopped choosing you. That's something a child deserves to know about her family." She reached out and took his hand, the same one she used to hold when she was scared of thunderstorms. She placed it gently on the swell of her belly. "She'll know your name," Lily said. "And she'll know who paid for her life, not just in dollars, but in silence, in distance, in staying kind even when we didn't deserve it." Thayer felt something shift in him. Not forgiveness. That word was too neat, too convenient. What he felt was recognition. He existed. He mattered. And he had not been forgotten. Not completely. Behind them, some guests began to clap, hesitant at first, then louder. A few family members remained stiff, unreadable. His father wasn't there, perhaps by choice. His mother stood at the edge of the porch, face pale, unreadable, her hands gripping the railing. But Thayer didn't look at her. Not yet. For the first time in years, he wasn't watching the party from the outside. His name had been spoken. His place had been claimed. Not in whispers, not in secret, but in frosting, in full view. The days after the party passed slowly like rain sliding down a window pane. Quiet, gentle, cleansing. Thayer returned to his studio apartment and noticed for the first time in years how silent it was. Not empty, just still. He moved around carefully, almost reverently, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. The sugar birds still sat on the windowsill. One had started to sag in the warmth of the late sun, its delicate wing beginning to fold. But he didn't move them. He let them age the way moments do, gently, truthfully. Lily called 2 days later, not to apologize again, just to ask how he was. The conversation was awkward, lopsided, full of pauses. But it was real. She told him they were thinking of middle names, and Ethan had suggested one, Thayer. She said it with a mixture of hesitation and hope, like she wasn't sure how he'd feel about being remembered that way. He smiled softly. "It's your child. Choose what feels right." But after they hung up, he opened the old notebook, the one with nursery sketches and lists of names. And next to one of the earliest entries, Hope if it's a girl, he wrote in the margins, Hope Thayer Graham. Not because he expected it, but because he wanted to remember that for a brief moment, he had been part of something again. The following week, an invitation arrived in the mail. Not a baby announcement, not a thank you card, a baptism invitation. Simple, white card, gold lettering. No personal note inside, just a line printed beneath the ceremony details. Godfather Thayer Quinn. He read the line 3 times, then once more out loud to no one. When the day came, the church was small. The kind built in the last century, all wood and stained glass, where the pews creaked and the walls carried whispers of generations. It wasn't the church of their childhood. It wasn't where their father preached. This one was different, chosen on purpose, chosen so that no one would have to pretend. Thayer sat near the front, hands folded in his lap. He wore a soft gray suit, nothing flashy. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't need speeches or spotlight. He just wanted to be present. When the priest called the godparent forward, Thayer rose. The walk down the aisle felt longer than it was. Not because of distance, but because every step carried the weight of absence. All the holidays missed, all the birthdays erased, all the chairs left empty and family portraits where he once belonged. But when he reached the front and looked down at the baby cradled in Lily's arms, something else took hold. There was no shame in this child's eyes, no confusion, no silence. Just the soft, unfiltered gaze of someone seeing him, truly seeing him for the very first time. The priest asked the usual questions. Will you guide this child in love? Will you help her grow with courage, kindness, and strength? Thayer didn't hesitate. I will. Later, as they walked out of the church into the sunlight, Lily paused at the steps and turned to him. You never asked for anything in return, she said, but I need you to know, you built this. You built a place for her in the world before we even knew she was coming. He nodded. There was nothing else to say. Love, when it is real, doesn't ask for recognition. It simply waits and holds the door open. As guests chatted and posed for photos, Thayer wandered to the edge of the lawn. He didn't pose. He didn't smile for the camera, but someone captured him anyway. Holding the baby in one arm, the light catching his face, a quiet peace settled in the corners of his mouth. And this time, when the family photo was framed, he wasn't cropped out. He wasn't blurred in the background. He was there, fully. Finally, by the way, not because they had changed completely, but because he had stayed long enough, quietly enough, lovingly enough to become undeniable. Have you ever loved someone from outside the room until the room finally opened? If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Someone out there may still be waiting to hear a name they thought the world had forgotten. And don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories, where every truth deserves its place.